So I'd love to welcome you all out to power upping. Stand by that decision.
It works. Yeah.
Powering up creativity with metaphors with Liz Monroe-Cook. I am president of her fan club. Don't listen to what anybody else says. I am the actual president. You are in luck. This is going to be a wonderful, wonderful session. I'm super excited to share this with you. She does have a handout if you have not loaded it from Sched. The wings have dropped it into chat. And if it's a problem loading it from chat, you can get it from Sched. Also, the live transcript has been enabled. So if you want to hide it, you can do that. If you have any questions about that, just private message me. And without further ado, Liz Monroe-Cook.
Thank you so much, Beth. I appreciate that. I think you're a fan club of one, but you know, okay, we have to start charging dues is what's going on. Turn this into a CEF revenue opportunity or something. I'm really delighted that you're all here. I see so many familiar names and faces, and of course, new ones as well. So I'm looking forward to building new relationships as well as honoring ones that are in place already. And today I approached this as a learner with you, and I thought I would give you a little bit of background because not everybody knows about me. I'm a psychologist by training. So I've always been, and I was trained as a clinician. So I was always powerfully absorbed in the questions about interviewing and how you draw information from people and how that relates to change for them and so forth and so on. So, but it was from a humanistic standpoint. That was the popular approach at the time was humanistic psychology, which by the way has many roots and links to CEF and to creative problem solving because, did you know, Abraham Maslow, yes, that would be the Maslow hierarchy guy, actually was at CPSI. He was on the board of the Journal of Creative Behavior for a while when it was initiated. So, and a friend of Sid Parnes. So you can see why I would be drawn to CPSI. I did spend a surprising sojourn in an advertising company after I left a clinical job in the research department. And I did primarily qualitative research, but also some quantitative research. And I consider that advertising to be the land of adult metaphors. And then I started coming to CPSI. And after I did that, I was really inspired to reclaim my life as a psychologist by working with organizations and with teams and using creativity as an important tool in that. And also using polarity thinking. And I'm going to give you a quick aside about polarity thinking because I've noticed already in some sessions, people are using the word polarities and some of you might not be familiar with that. There are many of us in this community who have been trained in or used the idea of polarity thinking that was really founded by Barry Johnson. And he's got a new book out called And, after 20 years of writing. You might find that interesting for those of you who heard him speak at CPSI once upon a time. And so a polarity is simply two things that can seem like opposites, but really need one another. And the most salient example I can give you is inhale and exhale. Yes, of course, inhaling is the opposite of exhaling. But if you don't both inhale and exhale, life is not going to continue. So it's the idea that over time, you need these two things to work together. And so I'm going to hint at a polarity today in today's session, but that's for later. So I just thought that would be important for you to know. Polarity thinking fits beautifully well with creative problem solving, which is one of those approaches in the world that encourages both and thinking. And we're looking for multiple solutions to things. We're often eager to see a big picture, and polarity thinking helps us do that as well. So that's me. I come to you by virtue of a friend of mine who's a wonderful coach. Her name is Ellen Romberg, and she is the person who introduced me to the ideas of clean language that we're going to be talking about in today's session. And she is what I call an expert learner. So that's another phrase that comes to mind for me about somebody who has an area of expertise, but they consider themselves a lifelong learner. And so you'll hear a little bit more about clean language as the session goes on. You're going to have a couple of breakouts today and a lot of reflection time, which is why the worksheet is important. So I have extracted elements from the worksheet to put on slides. So if you don't happen to have the worksheet, you'll at least see what's on it when we are at those tasks. But one of the initial ones was to ask you, if you would, to look at the flower of associations. And this is an idea that I got from the wonderful Branko Broekman, who some of you know from the Netherlands. He's the one who told me about the flower of associations. So if you didn't have time already, I'd like you to quickly jot, if you will, one image, word, or association that comes to mind for the phrase powering up creativity. So. And now, if you would, go ahead and put that into, select one and put it into chat so we can see what's coming to mind for you. I'm going to stop sharing. Let's go to chat. One association you had to the phrase powering up creativity. Okay, seeing things here. I'm laughing at a Crayola crayon with a charger plug, a jack in the box opening up, innovation, ignite, giving it life, high energy, Super Mario, ideas, big battery, lightning bolt, cooking up a storm, adding energy, kettlebells. Oh, wonderful, wonderful. So you can see how quickly just asking for those images and associations led to things that we can call metaphors, like opening Star Wars laser beam, an engine going chug chug, that kind of thing. We know that we're not really talking about the thing itself anymore. We're talking about another way of understanding it. So I'm going to read you a story because one of the things that I've learned about metaphors in preparing this session is that allegory or certain stories can serve as metaphors. So I'd like you, if you will, to look down or look away for the moment and reduce visual distractions while I read this story to you. And by the way, my informal polling of people tells me some people may already be familiar with this story, but please listen as if you've never heard it, what I will call fresh ears for the day. To listen, I recommend, closing your eyes. In another time and place, a professor sat with a group of new students. In front of the professor was a large translucent glass jar. The professor said nothing. She leaned down to her right side where there was a pile of fist-sized rocks. She took a rock and carefully dropped it into the jar, then another and another and another until no more rocks could be dropped into the wide neck of the jar. She looked at the group and said, "Tell me, is the jar now full?" And the group murmured its assent. The jar was now full. The professor said nothing and turned to her left side. By her foot was a pile of pebbles. She took a handful and carefully poured them through the wide neck of the jar. Handful by handful, the pebbles settled around the rocks until no more could be poured into the neck of the jar. She looked at the group and said, "Tell me, is the jar now full?" And the group mumbled that it certainly appeared as if the jar could possibly now be full, maybe. The professor said nothing and turned again to her right side, where by her foot was a pile of coarse, dry sand. She took a handful of sand and carefully poured it into the wide neck of the jar. Handful by handful, the sand settled around the rocks, around the pebbles, until no more sand could be poured into the jar. She looked at the group and said, "Tell me, is the jar now full?" This time, the group remained silent. People checked their fingernails or their shoes or looked out the windows. The professor said nothing and turned to her left side. And by her foot was a jug of water that she took and then carefully poured water through the wide neck of the jar. The water settled around the rocks, the pebbles, and the sand until no more water could be poured into the jar. Once again, the professor looked at the group and said, "Tell me, is the jar now full?" One courageous student stood up and said, "No, professor, it is not yet full." The professor said, "Ah, but it is now full with what we have." The professor then invited everyone there to consider the meaning of the experience. What did it mean? How did they interpret it? Why had the professor done this? Listening to their reflections, noting there were as many interpretations as there were people in the room, the professor congratulated them, saying so many different interpretations were no surprise. After all, everyone there was a unique individual who had lived through unique experiences. Their interpretations reflected their own lived experiences and the particular perspectives through which they understood the world. In that sense, no interpretation was any better or worse than any other. And she wondered, was the group curious to know her own interpretation? No better or worse than theirs, simply hers? Oh yes, they were curious. Well, she said, my interpretation is simple. Whatever you do in life, whatever the context, just make sure you put the rocks in first. Now, if you will, on your worksheet, there is a question, an area for you to answer. What are the key inferences or meanings that you draw from the story, The Jar? Just make some notes. Key inferences or meanings. And now look back at what you've just written. Select one, by the way, that's diverging, isn't it? And then converging, we're going to select one that you would like to share and type it into chat if you would. Look for space, gaps, opportunities. Sometimes the jar is really full. There's always more. Wait for things to settle. Think beyond the obvious. Prioritize properly. Stay open-minded. Focus. Room for a little bit more. Full can always be fuller. Perspective's important. Prioritize your big rocks. Bring people along during the exploration. Yeah, these are great. This is absolutely wonderful. Make sure you know what the big rocks are, the ones that go in first. Listen to others, be inclusive. Why is that we fill up or give up so quickly? And life is full of such very different things. Yep, create a foundation. The rocks go in first. Yep. So thank you. I thought that would be a nice way for us to open. And by the way, that gave me a metaphor that I plan to use in my, my presentation today. So you'll see that in a second. I'm going to share my screen again. I want to go back to my goals for today, just briefly, because I didn't mention that yet. So let me get into sharing this, please. So my plan today, listen, reflect, discuss, apply. I'm going to give you a definition. We're going to connect this to creativity and obviously exploring metaphors, both for yourself and for others, and generating some intentions. And I'm hoping that you understand that my wonderful colleague, Lindsay Burr, always has fake goals. My fake goal would be to give you the 10 clickbait internet metaphors that will make you instantly more creative. That ain't going to happen. I really hope as my goal to create more questions and answers for you. And I'm going to use the metaphor of slowing down to speed up in order to talk about the utility of expanding metaphors before we go to use them. So that's on today's plan. and get past the story. So we're going to put our rocks in the jar first, not all the rocks we have, but the jar and some rocks that I've selected for today and that you will select for today. And so the first rock is really to give you a definition. And this goes to one of the references that you'll find on your worksheet, George Lakoff and Mark Johnson, Metaphors We Live By. They define the essence of metaphor is understanding and experiencing one kind of thing in terms of another. Now, forgive me, all of those of you who understand the wonderful definitional differences, but I'm using a very broad definition of metaphor. So it's simile, it's analogy, it's a symbol or an image, it's a figure of speech, it's association, it's allegory, such as the story about the jar. So then I began to think, well, you know, why do we link metaphor to creativity? And oh my goodness, it's really traceable across millennia. There are quotes from Aristotle and Socrates that link it. Certainly, if you go back to Alex Osborne's original book, or one of his original books, he talks about the association of ideas. And William Gordon, who was one of the founders of synectics, had an article in one of the source books that talked about the importance of brainstorming analogies for the original problem. And in fact, synectics spent quite a bit of time doing that. You know, this problem is like what? And their brainstorming was around all the analogies that could be associated with the original problem. Richard Rorty, a philosopher, says, a metaphor is, so to speak, a voice from outside logical space. So this tells us that when we are looking for those creative associations, or when we're looking for creativity or connections to creativity, we're not attempting to use our logic so much as we're trying to use the space outside of logic. The frequent advice that we give or we hear in this community is use them to have more ideas and novel ideas. And of course, the famous or infamous think out of the box metaphor, which is interesting. Notice how this particular metaphor suggests that thinking has boundaries. So certain thoughts are in bounds and certain thoughts are out of bounds. Now, what does that suggest to you about how we're really using this metaphor? Another rock is to understand that metaphors are everywhere. Once you start paying attention to them, it's almost like, oh my, you're going to drive yourself a little crazy about it. Or I did drive myself a little crazy about it. But the thing to understand primarily is that they are unconscious. They are not so much in our minds that we're using them, and they are very unique to individuals. They are also highly cultural, highly contextual. Now, in Western culture, for example, Lakoff and Johnson point out that the fundamental metaphor about argument is that it is war. It is war. I'm attacking ideas. I won or lost that argument. Your position is, an attack on me, that kind of thing, so that we tend to approach an argument as that. But what if we lived in a culture where argument was really dance? If we from this culture were observing that, we might not even recognize that an argument is going on, but there could be so many other ways of perceiving argument besides war that that's one of the things that we can consider going forward. Metaphors are everywhere. As I said, they're strongly influenced by a lived experience. One of the things that's very interesting is how many of our metaphors have to do with spatial orientation. So things are in or out, they're up or down, they're forward or backward. And a lot of that may come from the fact that we human beings are ourselves containers that have an inside and an outside. So it's kind of fun to think about why we associate good with up and bad with down, or my mood is up, my mood is down. I'm going to push this idea forward, not take it backward, right? That tells you how clearly we orient ourselves by space. The interesting thing about metaphors too, Lakoff and Johnson point out, is that they can reveal a lot about a concept, especially if you take the time to extend them, but they can also hide aspects of a concept because they're sending us in a particular direction. So today, I want to see if we can change up some of the directions we go in. I want to check in with chat just to see if Beth, Mike, if you're seeing anything that I should respond to at this point?
No questions. Everybody is just fascinated.
Okay, you're thinking of your metaphors already, I hope. So now, so what I really want us to do today is, just as we've done about creativity and talking about creativity as something we can be deliberate about, or conscious creativity, I think we can be deliberate with metaphor and be conscious of metaphors by listening for them, by noticing them, and by exploring them. And by explore, I mean extending the metaphors. So let me give you an example of extending a metaphor. So Johnson, Lakoff and Johnson talk about, some people might say, oh, that idea is like a building, or our process is like a building. And everybody will nod their head and go, yeah, right, that's true. It is true. We are like a building company here. But we haven't discussed what the building materials are yet. Are we talking about bricks and mortar? Are we talking about straw? Are we talking about wood, something more substantial? Does our building have a height? Do we think of it as having flying buttresses and gargoyles? That might be very different. And what would we translate those to in our process? So I think that's kind of a fun way to think about, oh yeah, extending our metaphors, or exploring our metaphors, has that kind of opportunity in it. So I want you to start by thinking about your own metaphors. So I want you to think about some aspects of your creativity that are helping you get through the COVID pandemic period. Everybody got something listed there? That's your diverge moment. And then converge, please, by selecting one that you would like to explore individually. And I'm going to give you the tools for that exploration in a minute. Let me see. I need to get out of my share screen so that I can see. Will you give me a thumbs up if you're ready? Thumbs up? Anybody need more time? We're good? All right, looking at this. Some I can't see. Okay. All right, so here's what I'm going to introduce to you now. I mentioned that my friend Ellen Momberg is the one who introduced me to clean language. And I'm just going to say a couple words about that first. Clean language approach was developed by people who were working in the world of trauma and psychology and coaching. And so I'm not advocating that this is going to turn you into a coach or to a psychologist. I'm also going to advocate that you keep boundaries around this as you do this clean language exploration of exploring positive metaphors, because it's not appropriate for us to try and open up something in a different way without having those moments or preparation or whatever we would need to explore a negative metaphor and help somebody close that off at the end. So, but here's clean language. Let me get to sharing screen again. Sorry, I'm a little slow on that. I'm trying to get faster. You just did this. You've got one you're going to explore. So I'm moving us now from understanding how metaphor can shape our thinking to an application to elicit a metaphor. And clean language questions are really highlighting the importance of being neutral. In asking a clean question, we do not impose upon the client any value, construct, or presupposition about what they should answer. And David Grove and Basil Panzer were founders. David Grove in particular is considered the founder of this work. So let me read a dialogue that's using some clean language questions. Oh, what did I do with my lovely dialogue? Sorry about this. If you could only see how many papers I have in front of me. All right, so here's a little dialogue that emphasizes clean language questions. So it starts with someone saying, I'd like to increase my awareness of metaphors. And the interviewer says, what kind of awareness is awareness of metaphors? The person answers, it's like having a box of keys that open treasure boxes. Interviewer, is there anything else about awareness of metaphors? Answer, yes, it's shining a light on the treasures inside, and particular things gleam that are very valuable, like gems and gold. Question, where is this awareness of metaphors? Well, it's kind of like in the center of my forehead, almost like a third eye. It's linked to the center of my chest too. Interviewer, what kind of box is the box of keys? Answer, it's made of wood and precious metals. Questioner, is there anything else about the box of keys? Yes, there's a central key that is gold and crusted with diamonds. Okay, so starting with a metaphor, well, actually starting with a concept, awareness of metaphors, it moved into a very individualized description of what awareness of metaphors is. Now, I'll just confess, that was my little internal dialogue about why I wanted to become aware of metaphors. So I want to point out the flow of questions in there now that you've had an example. And this is on your worksheet also, but let's talk about it a little bit. The first question, not always necessary, is what would you like to happen? That's a general opening. If somebody's already said something that is a concept for you or even a metaphor for you, you ask them what kind of, in this instance, it was what kind of awareness of metaphor is that? So you use, note at the bottom, you fill in X with the exact words of the answers rather than paraphrasing. This is a time you don't want to paraphrase. You want to use the exact answers. So what kind of awareness of metaphor is that was in the dialogue? That's beginning to explore, and then a metaphor may appear. If a metaphor didn't happen to appear, I could ask, that awareness of metaphors is like what? And there we might have heard, oh, like a treasure box, okay? A keys to treasure box rather. So you would use that kind of question if you're trying to elicit a metaphor, not about a metaphor that's already emerged. If you ask that question about a metaphor that's already emerged, people are going to kind of look at you funny and go, I just told you that. And here's an interesting question. And is there anything else about X? Is there anything else about X? Now you can use that repeatedly, as I did in that sample dialogue, to deepen the understanding. And then another question is, where is that? And the interesting thing about this, and when you look at some of the clean language books, they call this the name and address questions, the name and address questions. So I want you to understand that you can practice this. It's going to feel a little stilted. And I also want to point out something that is a little bit different about asking, is there anything, and is there anything else about X? Notice that that's a closed-ended question. There's a yes or a no to that, but people will naturally start filling in the yes if there is a yes. If it's a no, you don't bother them anymore. Okay? If you're trying to expand on this metaphor, you might then simply go to where is that, what else might happen, questions along those lines. In creative problem solving, we often encourage people to keep asking what else, what else, what else. That's a great way to get another idea out. But the thing to be aware of by asking the question, what else, is that it does have a presupposition in it that there is something else. And if you're totally trying to be neutral, that would not be the way you could get into neutrality. That would be presupposing something, applying a construct, if you will. So let me see if there are any questions about that. I'll stop share. We'll go back to the screen, look at chat. I just want to say, Marlene Anziani, will this deck also be in SCAD? I'm going to put in not the whole deck. I'm going to put in information decks. Information slides. There are a few that aren't already represented on the worksheet. So there may be 2 or 3 more slides that will be there, but not the full deck. Anything else? Yes, I think it's okay, Laura, to ask anything else. It's not technically in their list of clean language questions, but I think it is a yes, no, right? And it tells you whether or not the person is feeling complete about something. I often contrast asking what else as a question where you're expecting the dialogue to continue, and anything else is like last call. Before we move on to the next thing, is there anything else? So little interviewing trick with that. Okay, let me go on to what I'm going to have you be doing then, because we're getting close to what I want you to have as your thought time here. So back to sharing screen. Let's see if Liz can make this any faster. No. I'm laughing at myself here. All right, so there are your clean questions. They're on your worksheet. What I'd like you to do in individual reflection right now is use the clean language questions on your worksheet. Explore one aspect of your creativity that is helping you get through the COVID period. You might not have to use that first question, what would you like to happen? It could be something like using my creativity to get through the COVID period. But take a minute, let's let this go for about 60 seconds here and give you some time to answer these questions.
Liz, could you remind people where on the worksheet they're supposed to be working?
Yes, it's the clean language questions that you're now applying to what part of your creativity is helping you get through. It's B and C on your worksheet.
Thank you.
Okay, and that's about 60 seconds, a little bit more. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have you do a breakout. And in the breakout, please take a moment to briefly introduce yourselves, of course, and then I'd like the 3 or 4 of you is what's going to happen here, to discuss what did you discover in that exploration of your own metaphor, and what was it like to use the clean language questions, and so far, what is this exploration like for you? Mm-hmm. Yeah, welcome back.
Four, 3, 2, 1.
Hello.
It's popcorn to me. It looks like popcorn.
I'm trying to find the worksheet question. I want to double check, if I may, with Laura Pinsky. Are you back yet, Laura? Did your question get answered about the analog question that can elicit metaphors? It's what kind of X is that?
Yes, sorry. After I asked the question, I realized it was on the page. Sorry.
Oh, no worries. I just want to make sure Mike was on it. Mike was on it. Thank you, Wing Mike. So we wanted to make sure you're okay. So I'd like to ask you, if you would, to just let's do a little popcorn, as it were, and have some people speak up about what did you take away from that conversation, something that you'd like to have the others know. We'll take this for a couple minutes. Anyone can speak up.
We had quite a long conversation on the word clean.
On the word clean, yes.
Does it have connotations, and
Yes.
what does it have associated with it, and what does clean mean to you? And there was a couple of different interpretations. And does that word come with some kind of judgment for the person that it's?
Yeah, right. It's a great point. I will claim no responsibility for inventing that phrase. As I read the books that I have listed on the references there from the clean language community, my sense was clean became, if you will, a metaphor for neutral. Clean of any of my metaphors, clean of any of my constructs that I'm imposing on you. So I don't know if that helps, but
It's the exact word we settled on, neutral.
yeah, neutral.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, exactly. What
We
else?
also talked about how in the market research, qualitative research world, the clean language and neutral example was a wonderful tool to have in our arsenal when we're trying to convince clients that you really have to formulate your questions cleanly, you know, or if it is a yes or no, that you offer both in the question. You can't say, do you like this? It's, do you like this or not? So having that terminology, clean language, is wonderful to be able to use as an explanation.
Yeah, Shelley, that's just great. I lived in that world for a while, as you know, so I'm really dedicated to the power of asking the right questions, you know, so great point.
So we were a little lost.
Okay.
Because we were talking about we were actually focusing on the question about the pandemic, like the creative activity in the pandemic. And then we were trying to understand how this very real activity, the metaphor, and how the metaphor relates to the X and what is the X. And yeah, so, and then we introduced each other and we had a very nice conversation, but basically we were slightly lost.
I'm glad you had a nice conversation. That's the most important thing. And if you could identify one or two metaphors having to do with how you all faced the pandemic, that's enough. You know, whether or not the clean questions work instantly for people is less my concern.
But I still do have a question. Why is it a metaphor what I did during the pandemic? I mean,
it's
like
not,
you know, it's right. It's not. I mean, for example, for me, it was a certain activity. And then for the others, it was another activity. So what are those activities? They are pillars. And then the pillar is a metaphor, or there's a safety blanket. And then the safety blanket is a metaphor.
Exactly.
But so, and then I got confused, like, what's the X? Is the pillar the X, or am I writing the X?
Well, the X is always just what the answer was to the question. Okay, so before. So in some instances, the activity is the X, and in some it is the pillar. But you did get to metaphors, and that's all that I really am concerned about is, you know, you looked at some activities and you said, well, that activity is like what? Oh, it was like a safety blanket, you know? So that means you did elicit the metaphor with the conversation, and that's what's important. So clean language could be a whole presentation on itself. Cheryl, go ahead, please.
Yeah, no, one of the things that came up in our discussion was sometimes the questions elicited two metaphors, and then I saw the word labyrinth in the chat earlier, and so I wondering about, you know, so you could explore this metaphor and you go down a different path, and another metaphor, and you go, so you could get a list of metaphors and different ways to explore them within.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the whole philosophy that I was trying to infuse this with is to understand how distinctive individual metaphors are. They are not, and we in the creativity community often assume that we're going to be able to give somebody a metaphor like, how is your challenge like a tree? And that's going to work. Without my understanding what a tree means to you. So sometimes it is, and we'll get to this later in the conversation, sometimes it's beneficial to offer a metaphor for people to play with. But today we're talking about how can I draw out the metaphors from you or draw them out from myself in order to enhance my creativity or in order to enhance the creativity of the group. So I do think that it's essentially a divergence process, Cheryl, that you are drawing out a multitude or a possible multitude of lenses, if you will, to use a metaphor for metaphor. So anything else? I'm just trying to see if there's anything else. It's just, as Leo says, it's just trying to let the interviewee craft their own metaphor by keeping questions super neutral.
Liz, it's Marilyn Barefoot.
Hi, Marilyn.
First comment is your visuals on your deck are so beautiful. And then we talked about the rocks. And so
Yeah.
Could you explain why I had rocks in my head the whole time? Like literally my metaphor is like the foremost thing in my head is a rock because you had so many beautiful rock discussions. And I'm like, okay, I got to get rid of the rocks because that belongs to Liz.
Right. Yeah.
And now I gotta, does that happen? Like people just have this thing foremost in their head. Rock.
Right. And to use, well, because I read the story about the rocks and because I'm using the visuals of the rocks and all that kind of stuff, that's the cautionary tale, isn't it? That I've imposed a metaphor of mine at the start of this and in my visuals. So I'm asking all of us to be conscious of that fact. And when we need to move from our own constructs about creativity, our own ideas about our experiences, our own metaphors for our experiences, to having those emerge. So it's a great point. I'm so glad you brought it out because, you know, again, unconsciously what I did was impose a very powerful metaphor.
Well, I didn't realize that until I asked the question because I hadn't put the two things together that Liz had imposed rocks. I just knew that I couldn't shake the rocks out of my head and I had to really work hard to get rid of the rocks to try and do something new and original that had nothing to do with rocks.
There you go. There
okay,
you go.
I'm good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And, you know, cautionary tale again, if you are in designing a session or in trying to work with your own creativity, starting with a metaphor that comes from outside you, be aware that that's both useful and impositional. Right? So we'll talk more. That leads us to the polarity that I'm going to get to at the end. So
Liz, can I?
Please, Chris. Yes, hi.
Yeah. I was sharing with my group a metaphor that I have used talking about COVID because I found that there were things about COVID that I found myself struggling with because it was such a distortion of reality. But then there were parts of COVID that were very clarifying. So I had both a distortion of reality and clarifying of reality. And so I use the metaphor of a bell jar. Do you guys know what a bell jar is?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Beautiful.
I happen to have one of these in my office because it houses my aunt's childhood teddy bear.
Okay.
But there's a famous book called The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. And she talks about her mental breakdown and how it was like being in a bell jar because everything was distorted. And it was a really powerful book for me because I find that sometimes if any of you have struggles with depression or any mental health issues, there are some days where if I'm having a tough day, I say, I'm in the bell jar a little bit. And I have to remember that I'm seeing everything distorted. But I found that in COVID, I kept remembering that there was a part of it that was being in the bell jar because some days I'd see things distorted, but then sometimes I'd see things with more clarity. So for me, it was the bell jar was the metaphor for my creativity in COVID.
Yeah, that's really lovely. I'm looking at a couple of others in chat, you know, metaphor was a big library. And yes, Marcia is making a wonderful point about the subconscious connects really well with metaphors. And I think it's absolutely true. There was an earlier chat question about, can I speak more about how metaphors function for us and how they help deepen understanding? Let's come back to that, Yardna, because if that's not clear to you later in the process, I want to come back to that question. Okay, so, but I want to move us on to the next thing, which is on your worksheet again. And let me just share my screen for those of you who don't have a worksheet. And she's still slow. Okay, moving on. Beautiful, let me move on. Here we go. On your worksheet is a spot for you to finish these sentences with a word or short phrase. And you can be thinking of creativity for an individual, yourself, or creativity for a group. And I just like to have you work quickly here. Creativity is like at least 10 statements. And if you want to write more, of course, do that. This is diverging again. This is part D on your worksheet. This is, for those of you who don't make a point of it, this is a wonderful chat to save at the end. There's so many good things that we haven't had time to discuss. Okay, and I'm going to ask you, no matter how many you've written down so far, to go to the next step, which is, of course, select one. And then we're going to, instead of posting in chat this time, thank you to Lisa Cavallero, who helped me understand that there's something called Padlet. Some of you who are teachers may have used Padlet already. This time we're going to post, instead of on chat, we're going to post on Padlet. And I think you can't click on the slide, unfortunately, and get to this tiny URL, but they're going to drop it into chat for me. So we'll open Padlet at this point, and we're going to post your answers for creativity is like, your metaphors. Possible. So pick one that's positive if you don't mind, you know, so that is. I have to get myself into Padlet.
Also, if for some reason you can't access the site, then just feel free to drop yours in the chat, and we will get yours posted into the site.
These are wonderful. The party climbing a mountain.
To type a message, I believe you just have to double click and a thingy will come up.
Yeah, it's that, or down on the right-hand corner, you can hit that little plus sign. I believe that gives you a note too. Exploring like an adventure, flow, diving in the ocean, patterns forming on the beach when the tide goes out. Vacation for my rationality, like air, you take it in and it expands. Expansion, the beyond. Okay, these are great. So, doodling on a perfectly painted wall. Has anybody had difficulty getting into Padlet? Are we using chat as well, or is it all happening in Padlet?
Yeah, it's not letting me in for some reason.
Okay, oh boo, all right, well, so as Mike said, go ahead and do that on
Yes,
chat.
yes, for the folks who are having trouble, as I said before, just feel free to drop yours in chat and I will post it in the, or on the page.
And is everybody able to see Padlet? Are you able to see Padlet as well as chat? I mean, those of you who are in Padlet can see, right?
If you can't see Padlet because you can't get in, we can share screen.
All right, maybe, yeah. Beth, would you do that then? You're in Padlet? Would you kind of just show people what's here?
Yeah. It's gorgeous.
It's really wonderful. You know what? I'm sure there's a way for us to copy this. And if we save chat and this, then what we can do is put this instead as one of the after slides too. This is just great. All right, so for your next breakout, that's what we're going to do now, is a breakout. I'd like for you to have picked one of those metaphors or one of those statements about creativity. It might not be a metaphor yet. And in your breakout this time, you're going to be in trios once again. If you're not in a trio, or if you find yourself, well, wrong. If you're in a pair, that's fine. But if you find yourself in a room by yourself, then come back to the main room, because I want you to be able to experience some of this. You're going to actually do an interview. So we've selected this. And here are your instructions. You're going to pick a positive statement about creativity to explore next. On your worksheet, again, using the clean language questions or whatever works best for you. I'm not trying to impose those either. I want you to do 3 short interviews, rotating through the roles of interviewer, speaker, and observer. And so you'll have about 3 to 4 minutes of each interview. And you're going to explore that person's statement in order to draw out a metaphor if one isn't already mentioned, and then keep expanding that metaphor using the clean language questions like, is there anything else about that? Is there anything else like, about that? This will be a 15-minute interview, and we'll send you a signal when it's time to change roles, so that everybody should have the experience of being interviewer, speaker, and observer. Observers just kind of notice what's happening so that you can talk about that briefly at the end. Okay, ready to go into the breakouts. You'll be with your same folks, by the way. Welcome back, welcome back. Because we're starting to have a bit of a time crunch, I'm going to not solicit as many comments this time, but I'm going to tell you about something that I got drawn into that might be helpful right now. If you have any other key questions, of course, put them in chat. So one of the questions was, well, after we've elicited this, then what? Well, I think you do the same thing with the elicited metaphors and the expanded metaphors that we do anytime. You go back to what is it that the person wants to have happen, and in what ways does this expansion of their metaphor help them do that, okay? Or If they've already identified a challenge, a group has identified a challenge, maybe they've picked a metaphor that's emerged from somebody in the group, or the group has explored a group metaphor. And then you go back and you apply it to the challenge, just as we do in any other circumstance, you know, but the difference being we've not inserted the metaphor, we're drawing it from them. So somebody asked earlier, Eduardo, I believe it was, you know, would love to hear how facilitators are using metaphors. Yes, that will be a whole other session. Please use that as part of extending your learning. Have those conversations with people. There are coffee hours, you know, there might be ways to talk about it. Reach out to people that you're seeing in the sessions. So I'm just, I want to look at the very last part of this to see if there's anybody being neutral, you're allowing the other person to have their experience. Yep. Neutrality feels false. How do you establish rapport? Of course, in my mind, you might need some opportunities to establish rapport, Yarna, before you start using these questions. And when I started using these questions, I thought, God, I feel really stiff. But that's because I was really literally just being a parrot and not being Liz asking these questions. So I think your personality needs to remain in the room. What we're trying to eliminate is your constructs or your metaphors for somebody, and instead draw theirs out. And I agree with Shelley, empathy. And the cold and detached thing, yeah, inhibited being interviewed because the interviewer didn't come across as sincere. Yeah, these are all beginning use issues, you know. So if all you get to is the concept of drawing out, then you've done what I hope to do today. And in a 15-minute breakout, that ain't gonna happen, if you know what I mean. So I'm gonna share my screen again because I wanna take us through the final parts here that I wanted to accomplish with you today. So we've done the trios. Let's move on to the other thing. I wanted to point out that we are dealing with a polarity here, in that sometimes we lead the metaphor and sometimes we follow the metaphor. What might be happening for us is if we're overdoing leading with our own metaphors, we might want to think of a sequence where we follow our participants or follow ourselves first before we look to use an external metaphor. So if you would, this will be one of the slides that I add afterwards. I think it's a moment to make some choices. So you can look at these questions. In what ways leading the way with existing metaphors might have benefits, certainly efficiencies and things like that. And if metaphors are always led by others, what might the issues be? We may have disconnects for people. They might not ever really relate to the metaphors that are being led by others. Or they may have a very different and contrarian interpretation of the metaphor that's being used, and so it could throw off your dynamics in a group pretty easily too, because they are so culture bound. And then on the other side, in what ways might eliciting the metaphors from within have benefits? And if metaphors are only elicited from within, what might the issues be? So that's a little exploration you can do afterwards as part of extending the learning. And I want to point out that as I was doing this presentation, I was reminded of a spectrum of questions that one of my interviewing mentors talked about, which was moving from high external control to high internal control, or I'm sorry, high topic control to low topic control with the probes that you're asking. So if somebody says, well, I don't like this product because it seems very cheap. So a high topic control probe would be, what do you mean by cheap? Okay. Low topic control for that probe would be, say more. Okay. So I think there's a parallel when we're talking about the use of metaphors. So there's high external control of metaphors and high internal control of metaphors that we can be aware of and make some choices about. So with high external control, I'm giving you the metaphor. How's your challenge like a tree? What would Elon Musk say about your challenge? If your challenge were an animal, what animal would it be? That kind of thing. I might do something like offer you a picture, a vague metaphor. I'm not, what might this picture have to do? Maybe it's even a doodle, you know. What might this picture have to say to you about your challenge, or what might this picture of a field have to say to you about your challenge? I could offer a vague metaphor, and the person interprets. You know, I could say, "Here's a picture," and say nothing more about it. How do you interpret this picture? Or, as happened at our opening, we were invited to have a set of objects. Now I'm at the, you know, person selects a metaphor from a set and interprets. So we had a set of objects that we had found and brought, and then we narrowed down to 3, and then we picked one. And meanwhile, all of this was interpreting on our own. But the one thing that I'm trying to get to today is when you draw the metaphor out from the group or the person, and then use that and have their interpretations work for you. So I'm sorry that some of the questions might have felt awkward and uncomfortable, but if you just get the principle that you want to start with what the metaphors are that someone is using already, and then help them expand them, you've gotten the main idea of this session. So I'd like you now, if you would, to harvest the diamonds. I'm going to assume there are some. Harvest the diamonds from this session and set an intention, if you would, about how you might do something differently as a result of what you've heard today. And this time, we'll just have you blast this into chat, if you will. How might you use something that you've learned today?
Liz, as people are entering their intentions into chat,
Yes.
I'd love to thank you for this fantastic session. This has been wonderful. I agree with somebody who's like, the images are beautiful. Thank you so much for your generous giving of knowledge. Liz is a great resource for everything. So thank you all for being so present and participatory. That makes such a difference for everybody. These sessions are great because you are here. But this is just the start. We still have 2 great sessions and 1 fun session. I mean, the other ones are going to be fun also, but come back and join us in half an hour for Melissa's Wild Insight. Pro tip, have your phone or some pictures with you. You'll want them. And then later on, Marta's From Another World, what being an alien can teach you about empathy. I don't think you need any pictures for that, but you should bring your empathy. And then finally tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern, our first social event, Wine Pairings and Preferences with Beth Miller's husband, Jim. Because if you're married to somebody in nonprofits, you work for free there too. That one's a BYO, whatever beverage you want, and the dress code is comfy. I will be in my jams. But before we go, thank you so much, Liz.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm going to stick around in case there were a couple people that had questions. So